What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing a complete hero guide for one of the best duelists in Star Wars Battlefront 2, Count Dooku. In these hero guides we're going to be covering everything that could possibly need covering, from base stats, ability stats, the best star cards for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, as well as some of the best maps to choose them on, some general tips for those game modes, the best star cards for heroes vs villains and HvV Showdown, which enemy characters you need to look out for, and then lastly covering some general tips for the hero game modes as well. So as you can see, this guide is going to be breaking down every single aspect of the hero. If you're new around here and you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Battlefront 2 content, and be sure to hit that notification bell as well so that you are notified each time I upload more videos like this going forward. But anyway guys, with that out of the way, let's get stuck right into it. So starting off with Dooku's base stats, and all around he actually has some of the best stats in the entire game, as really he doesn't have that many weaknesses. Starting off with his base HP, he has 750, which is the average for most Saber users, and as for how much health he can regenerate at once, he can regen up to 250 HP, which again is about the average for most Saber heroes in the game as well. In terms of his damage, he deals 130 damage from the front and 160 damage from behind, both slightly above average, however nothing too special either. Now where those stats improve though is that he has a swing speed of 2 swings per second, which is up towards the higher end compared to most other Saber heroes, so not only is his damage slightly higher, but he can also swing slightly faster too, so it does all add up at the end of the day. He can swing 14 times before running out of stamina, which is roughly the average for Saber heroes, with most heroes falling into about the 12 to 14 range. However, he can also block 14 Saber attacks as well, which is again slightly above average. So like I said, his stats aren't anything crazy like Vader or anything, but they are all just a tiny bit better than most, and they do all add up to create a pretty well-rounded hero. Now one last thing that isn't actually written here is that Dooku actually has 3 dodges as well, which is one more than anyone else in the game. So that might seem a little bit insignificant, but trust me, it does come in handy if you do make the most of it. Now moving on to his abilities, and his abilities are decent. I definitely wouldn't say they're up there with the best overall, but they are fairly well rounded, much like his base stats, so they definitely are not bad by any means. His left ability is the lightning stun ability, which hits anyone in the area of effect with a flash of force lightning, dealing damage and knocking them off their feet. It deals 160 damage on one single enemy, however for each extra enemy that it hits, it deals 10 less damage. So if you hit 2 enemies, it'll deal 150 to both of them, or if you hit 3 enemies, it will deal 140 to all of them and no longer be a one-hit kill. So that does take it from probably a crazy good ability to just a decent ability overall. It has a 15-second cooldown, which is pretty decent. The ability is far from his best, but at least that lower cooldown time does add a little bit to its value. Moving on, we have his middle ability, which is called Duelist, and this one is by far his best ability, causing him to gain an added 25 damage per swing and increasing his swing speed at the same time, taking it from an already fast 2 swings per second to a whopping 2.4 swings per second instead. The ability lasts for 10 seconds, which is actually really long considering how good it is. If you can get yourself into some tight close quarters areas and essentially just swing spam your enemies to death, then you can rack up some huge multi-kills with this ability, and it only has a 13-second cooldown as well, so overall this ability is really good, and like I said, it is by far his best ability. Now for his right ability, we have Expose Weakness, and this one is kind of similar to Lightning Stun in that it's far from bad, but it does also feel pretty situational at times, and it's not something you even need to use to be able to do well with him. Expose Weakness targets one enemy and increases your damage on that enemy by 20%, lasting 5 seconds before those effects wear off. It requires a 15-second cooldown, which is pretty decent, but in saying that, I never find myself wanting to use the ability all that often, so the cooldown timer could honestly be 1 second, and I still don't think I would really use it all the time. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities, and now we're going to move on to some tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, starting off with his best star cards. Keep in mind these cards are just a matter of opinion. There aren't really any loadouts in the game that are objectively the best or anything like that, but these are just what I find to work best in these game modes. The first card I'd recommend is the Sith Control card, and this one gives Dooku up to 120 more health regen, taking his total to 370, which is nearly half of his health, so this one is a no-brainer, especially for newer or less experienced players. The second card I'd recommend is the Balanced Duelist card, and this one just simply reduces the recharge time of Duelist by up to 4 seconds. Like I said, Duelist only has a 13-second cooldown already, so this can take that to only 9 seconds, and with 10 seconds active time, that means you can actually have Duelist active more often than it is not active, so once again this is a must-have card for Count Dooku. The third card I'd recommend is the Initiative card, and this one makes it so that every 15 seconds, Count Dooku's regular saber attack will actually count as a critical hit, dealing up to 50 extra damage when fully upgraded. Essentially every 15 seconds your lightsaber will deal 180 damage or 210 from behind instead of 130 over 160, so that helps helps with getting some nice and easy one-hit kills. Now that card is a favourite of mine just because I do love getting some one-hit kills, but it is far from a necessity, so if you're looking for another card, then the Masterful Duelist card is definitely his next best, adding up to 20 more damage to Duelist attacks, taking it to a total of 45 added damage, or 175 over 205 while it's active. So this one also allows for plenty of one-hit kills, and I find it to really help with taking out reinforcements or heroes in the blink of an eye. Now moving on to the best maps to choose him on in Galactic Assault, the 3 maps that I personally think he's the best on are Kashyyyk, Yavin 4 and Naboo. All of these maps have you as the attacking team, and all of them have a nice mix of flanking routes, close quarters areas and choke points, which are the areas that DOOKU thrives in the most. So in my opinion, these are the best map choices. However, as always, he is pretty decent on any map if you do play him properly. Now moving on to some general tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, and like I just mentioned, DOOKU is definitely at his best when he's getting those really nice flanks and fighting enemies who are all bunched up together, as duelists can see you taking out whole squads in literally 2 to 3 swings sometimes, and so playing it a bit more slowly and looking for those openings in terms of flanks or choke points is probably your main focal point. DOOKU is, I believe, the slower saber villain other than Vader. He's definitely not the most agile old geezer, and so he's not really a super aggressive character like Luke or Maul, at least not in the traditional way of just absolutely sending it straight at your enemies. If you can get around and behind your enemies, that'll take away the issue with his speed, since they're not really going to see you coming. Sure, they can see you on the map, but as I always say, most people just don't tend to look at the minimap for some reason, so I honestly don't find it that hard to actually flank enemies most of the time, unless they are obviously just really switched on. It does mostly just come down to map knowledge at the end of the day. It's not something I can necessarily teach in these videos, however I do have a lot of killstreak breakdowns where I actually cover those sorts of things, so be sure to check out that playlist if you are looking to learn some more about the actual gameplay itself rather than the more tips and tricks type of stuff in these hero guides. Knowing the maps and all of the different flanking routes, as well as just being able to read the enemy team and predict the enemy's movement patterns, those are really the most pivotal aspects to playing as DOOKU, because his actual gameplay speaks for itself. It's more just the situations that you put yourself in that are going to define whether or not you do well with him. To summarize, just do your best to learn the maps and where the enemies are going to be or where they're not going to be. Try and look for openings in the enemy's defense, and then when you do get behind your enemies, that's when you can cause most of your damage, and also do it in a way that is much safer and more reliable. So moving on now to the hero vs villain game modes, and he is a really solid hero in these modes as well, mostly because he just deals damage so fast that he can be a lot to handle for the enemy team. Starting off with his star cards, and the first card that I recommend is the Sith Control card that I mentioned earlier. The added health regen just makes him so much more of a tank, so this one is a no-brainer. The second card I'd recommend is also another card I mentioned for the trooper modes in Balanced Duelist. Duelist is an unreal ability in these modes, and so using it more often is only going to result in plenty more kills. The third card I'd recommend is again the Masterful Duelist card that I mentioned earlier as well. This one combined with those other cards just makes you such a tank while also dealing a heap of damage super fast. His other cards really aren't all that useful in my opinion, and same goes for his abilities outside of Duelist, so doubling down on that ability just adds to his strengths even further. Now, as for heroes that you need to look out for, the only 2 that I've put here are Luke and Han Solo. Luke is really the only character that can deal damage with a lightsaber as fast as DOOKU can, and so you probably don't want to find yourself in a swing spam contest with Luke, especially because his health regenerates so fast. And then Han is just a great character, like I always say. A good Han player can honestly just dominate almost anyone because his abilities are so good against saber heroes. So don't get me wrong, DOOKU can still do very well against him for sure, but just definitely keep an eye on him. Now, finally moving on to just some regular tips for the hero game modes, and funnily enough, his playstyle is pretty much the opposite of what I mentioned in the trooper modes. He deals so much damage and deals it so quickly, as well as having great blocking stamina and health regen plus that added dodge, that he is just about the best duelist in the game, and that means you can take on much more of a front-on approach rather than feeling the need to sort of always be looking for a flanking opportunity. That added dodge can also come up clutch in 1v1s with both sabers and blasters. It allows you to dance around saber heroes a lot easier and sort of just try and open up their defense. And then in regards to the blaster heroes, when you sort of play that roly-poly game with them where you let them roll and then attack when they've stood up, well, the third dodge allows you to really close ground on them much easier when they are done rolling, and it also allows you to quickly avoid some damage and sort of dodge behind them when they're normally not used to that happening, since every other saber hero in the game usually just dodges twice, so be sure to make the most of that added dodge. To summarize, it really is pretty simple in these modes with DOOKU. He's such a great duelist that you don't really need to strategize quite as much as in the trooper modes. Rather Rather, you can just sort of take the fight head on and generally do pretty well with him, and then making the most of that added dodge can also be the difference between winning and losing so many more 1v1s in these modes, so be sure to use that to your advantage. That is going to do it for this one though, guys. As always, a massive thank you to my channel members and my patrons for the continued support. If you guys are interested in supporting the channel as well, then be sure to check out the Patreon page that's linked down in the description. If you enjoyed the video and it did help you guys out, then be sure to leave a like down below to support the channel, and be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so you don't miss out on any more Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!